Hello everyone, great to see you not on Shabbos. Always good to see everybody on Shabbos, but not on Shabbos is also has a special atmosphere to itself, and it means that we're convening specifically to learn. So it's great. All this recording makes it all a bit formal, but should be discussion. Feel free to ask, to speak. I want to speak about emunah a bit. Emunah means belief. So, although the official topic is, right, do Jews need to believe in anything? What do they need to believe in? What don't they need to believe in? These are big questions, and we'll be getting to them in the next couple of weeks, meaning the content of our belief system. What is it that we're supposed to, or that we're meant to, or we're expected to believe? But I think by way of introduction, important for this week, to speak about, first of all, what does it mean to believe, right? The word believe is used in many different ways. People believe in all kinds of things, right? I believe that homeopathic remedies work, right? So that's a kind of belief. I mean, I don't, okay? But that's a kind of belief that we're expected to have with respect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to Tis Mitzrayim and other things, right? People use belief in many different ways, right? Do you believe in miracles? Do you believe in ghosts? People believe in many things. And the word emunah is also used in many different ways, right? So the question is, what do we mean when we say emunah, right? What is belief? What does that mean at all? How do you actually achieve a state of emunah, right? How is this achieved? What does it mean? What kind of steps do you need to go through? And of course, is there an obligation, right? Is there a duty to believe anything, right? As the heading of this series is, right? Do you have to believe anything, right? Many people want to say that Judaism is a kind of religion of acts rather than a religion of faith, right? Christianity is all about faith. It's all about belief. If you believe, then you're saved, and if you don't believe, then you're not saved. If you're Jewish, so belief, maybe has a certain place, but certainly we're surrounded in our everyday lives by a whole set of duties of actions, right? Of mitzvot, of whether it's mitzvot vis-a-vis HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Shabbos, or putting on tefillin, or whatever it is, or whether it's mitzvot with respect to our fellow man, right? Whether it's tzedakah and chesed and visiting the sick and burying the dead and so on. So there's many acts, right? It's a religion of acts. It's a system of acts rather than a system of pure faith. So what's the place of belief, of faith, of emunah, right, in our system? So these are all very basic kind of introductory questions. I'll try to get through some of them today, hopefully, and then we can get to the content in the next couple of weeks, meaning what is it? Where do we have to focus this muscle that we might call faith, right? Faith is a kind of, it's a muscle. Well, we'll speak about that in a minute, about where faith is in our nefesh, in our inner being. What's the place of faith, right? So, very briefly, I don't want to make this too source-oriented, but more discussion-oriented, understanding-oriented. But just to start off, the Rambam, when he speaks about the mitzvahs of the Torah, then he certainly places belief as a fundamental mitzvah, as one of the basic mitzvot of the Torah. The Rambam starts off in Hilchot Yesodot HaTorah, the fundamentals of the Torah, by saying that the first mitzvah, the most basic mitzvah that the Rambam has in the Torah is to believe, right? To have emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to believe in God, right? The Rambam has a number of principles of what we call principles of faith, right? Ikarei emunah. He has 13. Not all of them make it to the mitzvah level, to the level of obligation or duty, right? Only the first 5, which deal with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. After that, there's prophecy and Moshe Rabbeinu and Schava Onesh, meaning reward and punishment. Those don't make it to the mitzvah level in the Rambam, but the first do make it to the mitzvah level, belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and negating other gods, and so on. We might speak about the principles of faith at a later stage. But in any case, the very first mitzvah that the Rambam enumerates is the mitzvah of believing in God, believing in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says we learn this out from a pasuk, right? From the very beginning of the Aseres HaDibros, the Ten Commandments, which is Anochi Hashem Elokecha, right? Says the Rambam, the very first mitzvah, the most basic mitzvah is Anochi, I am Hashem your God, right? That's a principle of faith. That's a duty to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Ramban, right, in his Hasagas, the Ramban, where he writes about, he comments or he explains his differences with the Rambam, says that, well, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, that's not a wording that implies an obligation. It's like it's a statement of fact, right? I am Hashem your God. It's not you must believe in Hashem your God. And that's why he explains the Bahag, which is an earlier compendium, an earlier version of the 613 mitzvahs. So he doesn't include Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu as one of the mitzvahs. And the Ramban says, well, I'm not Chas v'shalom, he says, I'm not saying that Emunah isn't deeply important. The Ramban says, I agree that Emunah is fundamental to being Jewish, to Judaism in general, but he says, it's not a formal mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah as a duty, as an obligation, like obligations to put on tefillin, or to keep Shabbat, or to keep all the other mitzvot that we have in the Torah. He says, well, faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a kind of introduction. It's kind of precondition to keeping the mitzvot, because if you don't believe in God, then there's no logical reason to keep all of the mitzvot. Meaning, okay, you can say in a very elegant way that Judaism is a religion of actions, but why should you do them, right? So he says, well, the reason why you should do them is because we have this underlying, we have this first principles, and the first principles is belief in God, and that's why when we have the Ten Commandments, the Aseret HaDibrot, so the very first one establishes HaKadosh Baruch Hu as an assumption, right? It's an assumption of faith rather than a duty to believe in God, right? So the Rambam says you've got a duty, you've got an obligation. The Ramban says, well, you don't have to understand it that way. You can understand, like the Bahag, that Anochi doesn't mean an obligation, but rather it means a precondition, right? Without that, you're not going to be doing the mitzvot, because they'll say, why should I? Right? This is a very big question in general jurisprudence, right? You have a law, but why should you keep the law, right? Right? You have a law, the country, the Knesset, the parliament, right? The legislative forms a law, let's say, but why should you keep it? So there are many different explanations for why it's good and proper to keep the law, and there are also some who say, well, you don't, meaning you should, or you shouldn't get caught. But this is a big jurisprudence question, right? Do you need to keep the law in Nazi Germany, where the laws are obviously completely immoral, completely terrible laws? Do you have to keep those too? If you're traveling at 3 o'clock in the morning in Metula up north, do you have to stop at a red light? These are questions, right? So concerning the Torah, so the first assumption has to be that you believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? The Rav Soloveitchik puts it as follows. He says, according to the Rambam, it's a mitzvah, it's an obligation. According to the Bahag, or the Ramban, as he explains the Bahag, it's not a mitzvah, he calls it a hechsher mitzvah, meaning it's a precondition, it's something you need in order to reach all of the mitzvot, right? Without emunah, you don't reach the mitzvot. But it's interesting to think about the Rambam for a minute. Okay, the Rambam says it's a commandment. Well, who's commanding you to believe in God? Well, God Himself is commanding you to believe in Him, but that's a bit circular, right? So that one of the Rishonim, Rav Chastai Kreskas, who was one of the a bit later, a couple of hundred years later than the Rambam, he has a sefer called Or Hashem, and then he kind of makes this observation on the Rambam that there's something a bit circular here, right? how can God himself command us to believe in God? We have to...
Because he knows what's good for us.
Great, but if you don't believe in him, then you're not going to comply with the commandment of God to believe. Where does it begin?
It's a start, because as soon as Hashem says, believe in me, you might think, I believe in Hashem, I don't believe in Hashem, who is Hashem? And then that gets the ball rolling.
Meaning it gets you thinking.
Right.
Right. Possibly, meaning it would be a bit different though from all the other commandments. Once you believe in God, then you can have this very direct kind of commandment and commanded. But before you establish that relationship, it's more difficult. Like you say, it gets the ball rolling in a certain sense. He also asked the following question. He says, well, every instruction, every commandment depends on it has to be volitional. It depends on a person's volition, meaning you comply with the commandment. He says, well, when it's about faith, then is believing a kind of voluntary, volitional act that you kind of comply with? All right, now I believe. Belief seems to be something that either you have it or you don't. Meaning either you're the way that we usually understand the word belief, and I'm going to use this kind of as a springboard to speak about what it means to believe, right? But the way, talk about homeopathic remedies, okay? Either you're convinced or you're not, right? If you go to some homeopathic doctor and he tells you, you've got to believe in this, well, convince me, right? If you'll convince me, then I'll believe. If you don't convince me, then I've got no reason to believe in it, right? Convince me that JFK was killed by I don't know who, I think nobody knows who, I'm not sure, and not by some FBI conspiracy plot. All right, either you're convinced or you're not. There's to command you, to instruct the person, you've got, we might use this as a slang, you've got to believe me, but really you don't. Meaning, either you're convinced or you're not. So this is the second observation that the Or Hashem of Chassidai Kreskas makes on the Rambam. What kind of an obligation is it to believe, right? You can obligate me to do a specific action, to take my Dalit meaning, like we just did on Sukkot, and to hold them or to wave them, right? You can, an obligation to sit in the sukkah, an obligation to put a mezuzah on the door. These are all obligations that we can readily understand. These are actions, right? It's a volitional act, it's a voluntary act. You go, you put your mezuzah on the door. But in terms of belief, what does it mean to be instructed in belief? So I think that these questions provide a good springboard for thinking about what it means to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does it mean to believe in anything, really? Right? You'll often have people banding around the word belief for all kinds of things. But what kind of a state is it that really represents, that really embodies the belief that the Torah wants us to have when it says Anochi, that the Rambam's referring to, right? So some make a distinction between the word emunah on the one hand and the word yedi'ah, knowledge, on the other. But really in the Rambam, it's, depends a bit on the translation from the Arabic, but the Rambam uses them a bit interchangeably, meaning, the Hebrew of the 13 principles speaks about ani ma'amin, right, I believe. But in the Yesodei Torah, the Rambam says you have to know, right? Ladas, you have to know, Yudiyah. He speaks about knowledge. We often think about faith as a kind of leap of faith. You've got to make this leap of faith. Knowledge goes up to a certain point, and then you've just got to jump. What does that mean? What are you jumping into? It's kind of... So some try to explain this in the Rambam, that's the obligation, to make this leap.
But why make the leap?
Right. Number one, why make the leap? Because you have to. But again, there is a difficulty here, right? It's what are you jumping into exactly? What does this leap involve? So,
isn't it quite, isn't it relative though? If we're standing by Har Sinai, which, as far as I know, none of us in this room were, in our emotional, physical memory, we can only possibly believe because we don't feel like we were ever there, even though the rabbis, again, the Talmud, tell us we were there in a spiritual capacity. So that all is a circular thing again, because it's like, well, if you tell me I was there, I was there. So now I can believe, I can know I was there, but I can't tell you like I know that I'm here, that I was there.
Well, yeah, this is interesting because when you look at the Torah itself, right? You look at the Psukim themselves. The Psukim relate to this idea of belief, of knowledge, really, right? Ve'yadata hayom, you should know today, right? Yom, or the Psukim in Dvarim, Perek Daled, to know, to remember the day that you stood at Sinai and to pass it on to your offspring, to your children. So the Psukim really relate to this as if it's a very recent kind of event, right? That we saw and we pass it on to our children, and our children pass it on to their children, and so on. The whole kind of language is a bit foreign to us. It's a bit distant from us, you know. The Ramban and the Kuzari, for example, speak about the kind of passed on tradition from father to son. And the Kuzari, the Ramban also mentions this, that we have this kind of working assumption that our fathers or our ancestors, they don't pass on a falsehood. I don't know how much that works for us because, you know, there are many fathers going around in many different traditions, and they're all passing around different traditions. So how effective is it to say, well, you know, my dad wouldn't pass on a lie? Well, you know, who knows where it came from, and who knows how this developed over thousands of years, over many, many centuries. And you know, this kind of logic is difficult for us to work with. You know, the Rambam, of course, Maimonides, and others, you know, for example, Chovas HaLevavos in the beginning, and others are very philosophical about reaching a knowledge of Hashem, right? They work in very philosophical terms. Also, maybe it works for some of you guys. It's not the kind of language that we're used to. You know, if you read it, it's very Aristotelian. It's very kind of once upon a time, everything was based on philosophy. We understood the stars and we understood their motion based on philosophical arguments, right? All of science was a philosophy. Till today, we call our scientists philosophers, right? It's a PhD, it's a doctor in philosophy, right? So, you know, once upon a time, everything was philosophy. And the Rambam, of course, was in conversation with other philosophers of his time, the Islamic, right, the Muslim philosophers that were all very Aristotelian, and it was all a kind of different language. It doesn't work for us so much in establishing emunah. And then the question is, well, so what do we do, right? But what does it mean for us to believe in something? So, yeah.
Why is it that the Jews have to be commanded? Because you look around at the gazillion Christians out there, and they just believe, right? They believe in God, whatever their perception may be of God. You know, whether he had a son in a physical form or a ghost or whatever they call it. But they believe in God very simply. It's like not a whole philosophical debate for them. They just believe.
Well, it's not entirely true, meaning there is a lot of philosophical debate within Christianity about, you know, what does this whole thing mean, what's a Trinity, and how does it work, and who's the Father, who's the Son, and it's all very complicated. Now, it's true that if you go into some place in the Midwest, you know, find this simple guy working on his ranch or in his, you know, whatever, and see, oh, sure, you know, God bless. But the question is, you know, whether that's, some people do speak about, and I have to give this credence, that there's something that people speak about, emunat mima, okay, but like simple faith. And that's probably what a lot of these Christians we would call this, like a very simple faith. You know, they've been brought up believing, and they have an emunat mima, and certainly that's got value. You know, you just believe, right? It's like, why do you believe? Because I believe, right? You can't take away the strength of that kind of belief. but it doesn't work for everyone, you know. And once you begin to think, well, you know, what exactly do I believe, you know, and why exactly do I believe that, then it gets more complicated. You know, some people will go through all of their lives and say, I believe because I believe, I don't have any questions. And, you know, a lot of the Midwest Americans will go with that, you know, in God we trust, you know, whichever God it is, the God, which is great. But at the same time, the question is that, you know, clearly the Rambam, that invested so much philosophical energies, wasn't satisfied just with that concept of, you know, a simple belief, meaning a kind of emunat mima, you know, we don't need to have this discussion at all. Let's just, you know, just believe because we believe. But
for a Jew, there's slightly more ramifications for believing in God or not, because like, well, food and money. Like, I have to give up a bunch of money on Shabbat, and I can't eat all these things. So there's more ramifications.
Right. There are some for, you know, you've got your sacraments and you've got your, you know, you've got certain things if you're a Christian also, but it's not quite the same. That's true. Being Jewish is more demanding. Your belief.
And therefore, it'll be tested. Whether you know.
Right. Your belief is more tested.
There's plenty of Jews who believe in God, but they don't keep the mitzvahs.
Right. And by the way, that's also a good question. Meaning the value of belief per se. I think for sure that there's a big value in belief, but I just want to speak a bit about how I understand what this belief is, and then to kind of. So there's one approach, this kind of very simple belief, like Rochelle mentioned. Another approach is we mentioned the philosophical approach, which is a bit distant from us. Another approach, which today is quite common, is, you know, the kind of proof approach. You know, you take a guy that's not from, you bring him into some 4-day seminar program, you bombard him with all these kind of questions. Well, if you don't believe in God, then how do you understand this and that and the other? And then he comes out a believer, and he's like made a switch.
Are we born with them or not?
Right. That well.
And then as the years go by, you know, society and the world changes.
Right. So that.
Like we were taught the Torah.
Right.
I was just wondering if we were born with it.
Well.
Because before I became religious, I had emunah. I know that.
Right.
So I was just wondering if.
Well, you know, some Rishonim definitely speak about it. The Medrash, there's a Medrash that also speaks about it, that Am Yisrael are ma'aminim, b'nei ma'aminim, meaning there's something innate, right? The Kuzari speaks about this. Maharal also expounds on this, that Jews they have something innate, something inherent that makes them into believers.
Well, we have souls.
Right, we have souls, we have a soul that kind of guides us in our belief. One has to point out, though, that in today's day and age, it's more challenging. You know, once upon a time, belief was everywhere, as it were. Meaning a person became ill, or a person recovered from an illness, and he said, well, this is God at work, right? This is a Kadosh Baruch Hu at work. When he saw, you know, the sun rising and setting and the moon waxing and waning, he said, well, this is God at work. In our day and age, you know, post-scientific revolution, a lot of these phenomena, are understood in a very natural way, in a naturalistic way. You know, when a person has an ailment, then he'll, you know, take antibiotics. He'll put in a prayer. He'll say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help, that the antibiotics help. But at the end of the day, you know, he knows he's taking antibiotics. So it challenges the kind of natural world, the natural belief.
It could also be that once upon a time we had a different spiritual light.
A different spiritual,
when
I'm sorry?
light was created, I learned this last week, it was different to what we know today. So maybe the world is more, you know, kadosh. People could really feel it and see it. Today we can't see that light. It's not. We don't see spirituality.
Well, I mean, again, the light that we know today has been around for a long time, meaning, you know, since the 4th day of creation. It's true that before that there was already Or and Choshech on the very first day, but it's been a while. On the other hand, certainly, I mean, we see in this week's parasha, in Parashas Noach, we see that, you know, man descended from, you know, from living 1,000 years to living 120 years, and the Tselem Elokim is not the same Tselem Elokim that there was before. The divine image that we're created in and with is not the same as before. But, you know, it's a bit hypothetical, you know, it's theorizing, because what we know is what we are. What was before, who knows, you know, perhaps. What we know, though, is what we are today. And so the proof method, you know, it's sometimes effective, but I think it's a bit artificial. You know, to kind of work with intellectual argumentation and to say, well, now you've got to be a believer. I don't see that so much. You know, in my experience, people, let's say, become frum or become stronger in their faith, less because of intellectual argumentation, more because of their experiences, more because of the kind of people that they meet, because of the insights that they reach, not necessarily through kind of logic and intellectual argumentation, but rather through life experience, through life insights, through study, through studying the Torah. And what I would say is just going back to the Rambam, right? What does it mean to believe? Well, I think belief is really, and this my father-in-law speaks about this in the terminology is from him. He speaks about belief as a muscle that you have to work out in order to strengthen this muscle, and belief, emunah, in this sense, is a kind of internal muscle. It's not like believing in homeopathy, and it's not believing in conspiracy theories about 9/11. That's not anything to do with this muscle of emunah. That's to do with whether you're convinced or whether you're not convinced. Put that aside. That's a different concept of belief altogether. This belief is living in the world, and well, it's really about which world we're living in. Are we living in a world with a Kadosh Baruch Hu in our world, or are we living in a world without HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world? All right? Is the world, if you want to put it in slightly different words, is the world a serious place? Do we take things seriously? Seriously in the sense that they have meaning. They have meaning beyond a kind of haphazard, random world where things happen without any meaning, without any control, without any presence beyond the kind of day-to-day, mundane, everyday exchanges that we all experience, right? Is there a deeper meaning to the world? Does the world have something which is transcendental, something which is beyond, right? Is that a part of our world? Is it a part of our lives? All right? That's the question of emunah. Emunah is a question of which world are we living in? A world that has a Kadosh Baruch Hu with us, in our world, in our lives, or a world without a Kadosh Baruch Hu? The whole Torah wants us to get to this place. The entire Torah wants us to live with a Kadosh Baruch Hu. The pasuk in Yeshayahu tells us that we're here to draw a Kadosh Baruch Hu into the world, right? Amzu, the pasuk says, She'al Mem Gimel, Amzu yatzarti li, this nation I've created for myself. Tilasi yasaperu, tilati yasaperu, they should tell my praise, they should recognize me, right? Chazal speak about the pasuk in Shmos. It says, Zeh Shmi, this is my name, le'olam, right, forever. V'zeh zichri, and this is my memory, the way I'm mentioned, le'dor dor. And the word le'olam is written without a vav. It's written le'alam. Le'alam means hidden, like ne'elam, hidden. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a world in which He's hidden. Right? We don't see Him. Now, He did that for a reason. He did that in order to give us, as it were, something to do, to draw Him into the world. And that's the basic purpose of man, of humanity, of the Jewish people for sure. And that's the idea of emunah. Emunah means to live, a person with emunah and a person without emunah, it's not a question of leaps of faith. It's a question of where do you live? You know, it's what world do you live in? We're called upon to create a world. You know, it's not even where you live, it's creating a world. It's not like moving house. You're moving to, it's creating a house, it's building a world. We build a world of emunah. That's what we're actually called to do. And when you read the Psukim, you see that the Torah calls upon us to do this in every sense, right? When Avraham Avinu, right, the word amen means, right, to affirm something, right, to confirm. When we say amen, emunah, right, amen, means we're confirming something. We're affirming that the world that we live in is a world with a Kadosh Baruch Hu, right, which is not simple, right? Avraham Avinu did this, and the pasuk says, "Vayachshaveh lo litzdaka," right? Vayamen b'Hashem, he believed, believed for want of a better word, believed in God, he believed in Hashem. Vayachshaveh lo tzedakah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu considered it for him like a tzedakah, right? Like something which was, charity, or something which is something that Avraham Avinu did for Hashem, right? Beyond the call of duty, as it were, something special, right? Well, why is it so special? Once you believe, you believe. No, it's not once you believe, you believe. It doesn't work that way. Belief is a right. My father-in-law put it as a muscle. It's something that you have to train yourself in the whole time. It's about how you see the world, and of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can command us. We're starting from a certain starting point. That, let's say God exists, okay? We're not saying that there's no God. God exists. But from that point of departure, that God exists, to a real place of emunah, like the Torah wants us to reach, a place that we live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world, that He's a part of our lives, there's a big distance there, right? It's one thing to say, like your American Midwestern, right? Thank God, That's one thing, and again, it's a good place to start, but the end point is that there's a long way to go, and for sure, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can instruct us to give us a mitzvah of emunah, because it's a lifetime of work, it's a lifetime of seeing the world, and we all go through ups and downs in this. We all have days that we don't believe very much, because where's God in the equation? We get up in the morning and say, oh gosh, we all have these days, and really the mitzvah is to try to minimize those and to maximize the days where we get up in the morning and we wake up with a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we go to sleep and think, what have I done for a Kadosh Baruch Hu today? Where have I seen Him today in my life? And the way.
What do you do with today? You take some kid from New York who's very much pulled into the whole culture of New York, and podcasters like Sam Harris I haven't listened to, but I know he's very much an atheist or whatever it is. So they're like a new kid who's not in our world, where we have to build this muscle of emunah in our daily lives. I wake up and I also say something similar to oh gosh, probably a little more vulgar,
it's all the same.
Yeah, sure. But that kid who's not even at a starting point, he's a Jewish kid. So the philosophical arguments don't work as you suggested, because people don't work and function that way. It certainly won't build anything lasting. And the sort of it exists, and it's our forefather, transmission from the forefathers. Well, they don't really respect their father's approach at all, sure, because they've got YouTube to.
And often their fathers aren't telling them anything anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Fathers don't have any answers.
And if they are, it's a different language.
Totally.
Well, that's a great question. So sometimes the kind of proof ideas can serve as a springboard, but from my experience, the deeper way to get into it, and this is true for ourselves to develop, but it's also true for the guy coming out of left field without anything, is by actually studying the Torah. I think that, and I've seen this with many people who are not frum. Some of them are still not frum. But if you go through 6 months of studying Torah, then that does something to you. It's like, if you'll pardon the martial, I heard this from one of my Rebbeim. used a mashal of going out with a girl. Okay, so you meet, or with a boy, right? So you meet a prospective partner. You go out, okay. You speak for an hour and a half. Sometimes it just doesn't go, right? And you think, gosh, or whatever you think. Let me just get this over with, all right? But hopefully, right? It goes okay. You meet, you get to know each other, and then you meet again, and you develop a relationship. And the Torah really is the way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us, invites us to really meet Him. There are other ways that we meet Him also. We meet Him through our experiences in life, and that's another kind of avenue to emunah. But Torah is a very strong, can be a very strong experience. You put a guy through 6 months of studying Torah. I'm not saying dafka Baba Kama, There are other parts of Torah. Could be Baba Kama also, but certainly, parts of Torah that relate to, the Torah itself, right? The Chazal enacted that every week we read a part of the Torah. I think it's an amazing enactment, right? It makes sure that we read the Torah, right? That we actually we learn, we meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu by reading the Torah, and if we take that meeting seriously, then that gives us, kind of strengthens that muscle. It gives us, it builds up our emunah, and I think a person's life is inevitably changed if he does this seriously. Even if he doesn't become frum, he's not keeping all the mitzvot, and perhaps he never will, I don't know. But his life will be changed just by that experience of meeting, as it were, right, meeting HaKadosh Baruch Hu through studying Torah. And there's room to discuss what's the best thing to study, right? Where do you start from? It's another discussion. We don't have to speak about that now.
Would you call that like the more shabo yachzir?
Yeah, but not necessarily in, there's the Nefesh HaChaim kind of idea that speaks about the Torah in a metaphysical way, right? The Torah, because you study Torah, then in a metaphysical sense, that will create, right? That'll speak to his soul and will kind of strengthen his spiritual constitution, right, whatever it is. But in a metaphysical sense, or in a very transcendental sense, I'm speaking.
Manifest in this world kind of thing.
Right, but I'm speaking about it in a very in a more simple way. The Torah itself is like the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we learn the Torah. We kind of meet Him. We meet His word, and that's significant. Because we think about Him. We think about what does He want from us. We think about the moral aspects of what does the Torah want. We think about what does it mean to be a Jewish person and to be involved in the Torah, to be involved in this world of whether it's halacha, whether it's the stories of the Torah and their meaning, right? What do they mean for us? Whether it's to be part of our tradition, to be part of this Jewish history, right? That we also study through the Torah and could be through later books also. And just by this kind of study of Torah, that's one way in which we, get started, if you want. And
isn't that a bit of a loop? Like, in order to believe, you need to study. In order to really study, you need to believe. Like, you need a reason to why go and put the effort and study.
Well, I think that
Study something else.
there are other reasons to study. Many non-religious people want to study Torah because they want to study our tradition, just like if you're, I don't know what, if you're a guy from some Tibetan guy, you want to study your Tibetan tradition or other, a guy that's born a Jew will often want to study his tradition because that's who he is, kind of, I don't think you necessarily have to start from a position of emunah to get started in studying. There's an organization called Nefesh Yehudi, I don't know if you know it, some friends of mine set it up a few years ago, and they bring in students to study by offering them some stipend. That's also a good reason. You get
It doesn't have a reason. Why shouldn't you go off and learn?
You get a
study
stipend.
Islam?
Well, you know, that's a good question. You know, why shouldn't we just go study anything else? I don't have a great answer to that. You know, there are many people that get to emunah by studying Islam and by studying Christianity, but I just think that if we're Jewish, then it's just natural to study what we study, and that's also what I know. I don't know Islam. But you know, I think it's natural. It makes sense. It's intuitive. That if you're born Jewish, you're born into a certain tradition. This makes sense that you should study that, or at least become aware of where you're born into, of what you're born into. A guy that says, "Well, I couldn't care less what I'm born into. Just leave me alone." All right, you know, you can maybe pull him in by doing various, you know, kind of tricks of the trade. Some people know these tricks better than others. You know, but you know, again, that's like pulling people in. And again, once you've pulled them in, perhaps, then great. You know, once he's in, he's in.
It's just like asking our parents like where they're from, because part of that is us.
It's a heritage.
Right,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
to be honest, like, I find the book, the Torah, interesting. Like, when I picked up the Torah for the first time, I wasn't religious,
Right.
and I thought this is interesting. Like, you hear it in school,
Right.
but then I
And
can
it's
pick it up
ours.
myself,
And it's
because
ours.
There is a connection, and you want to know more. You want to go deeper.
Right.
If you're interested.
Right. So that's one avenue. Sorry, yes, Michelle.
I think in this generation, and I'll put myself into that bracket, even
Yeah.
my generation,
Sure.
okay, I think that we don't want it so much as maybe our parents' generation accepted that there was something, and our grandparents' generation didn't even question that there wasn't a God. So you come into our generation where like we're kind of like the Balchuga explosion, okay, and you come into it logically. Like you said, there's a few people that come into it logically. I happen to come into it logically. Someone decided to prove that
Okay.
God existed.
Good.
And I sat there and I'm like, oh man, are you for real? Because now I have an obligation to do this thing that I don't really want to do. But I believe it because you've proved it to me.
Right.
And so if I don't do it, I'm basically living a lie for the rest of
Right.
my life. So I'm cornered.
You remind me, Uri Zohar, I don't know if anyone knows, but there's a very famous Baal Tshuva called Uri Zohar. He says exactly like the same as you. He says it took him 2 years. I said he really didn't want to do anything because it was all like really hard and very unattractive. And then in the end, like after 2 years of speaking to all these rabbis and this, he said, well, that's it. I'm convinced. Now I've got to do it. But I don't know many people like this.
No, but you should know, I think the Baal Tshuva movement, you know, I think there's a lot of people who came into Judaism like that. And I think the generation that came after us, you know, like my cousin who's now 20 maybe,
Okay.
she's not interested. You could talk to her about it till you're blue in the face. She doesn't want to hear it. She doesn't care if she marries a Jew, if she doesn't marry a Jew. She's not interested in heritage. She's not interested in if her soul believes. She's not interested in even knowing if there's a God. So even though we're commanded to know and believe, this generation that we're in and our kids who we're trying to inspire and, you know, show them like the love of Torah and Judaism's beautiful, and it's really tough because we're cornered.
Right.
Which
Well,
doesn't sound very attractive, but unfortunately, I don't know if anyone else agrees with me. I could be a lone ranger over here, but that's how I feel. I feel like, you know, we're like hoping.
well, you know, there's again, emunah, I think is for all of us. Right? We all need to work on emunah. And like I said before, it's a lifetime of you know, of developing emunah. But you're right that, you know, if you're already on 20 or 30 or 40, then at least you've got something to work with to get to 45 and 50. If you're zero or you're on the minus scale, then to how do you pull people in? But that's a question which, you know, relates to you know, the kind of techniques that you have to be able to speak to people of this kind of new generation, as you put it, and to be able to kind of create a model that they'll be able to identify with, even from the place that they are in. You know, for me, for the place where I am, so I would identify, I mentioned about studying Torah. The other way that I would say is a strong tool, if you want, for want of a better word, to develop this kind of masal of emunah, is to reflect on our own kind of personal and national histories, right, on what we've been through, on what we've been through personally and what we've been through nationally, right? Think about the Jewish people, right, what they've been through over thousands of years, and they're still going. You know, for Mark Twain, that was like a very, you know, incredible thing that strengthened his faith, so it could probably strengthen ours also, if we reflect on that, if we reflect on sometimes on our own personal lives and how kind of decisions that we've made, like we've been guided to somehow make them in all kinds of ways that we would never be able to write this book up front, even if we tried, and then looking back. So that's also, you know, it's a certain way of looking at the world. It's a way of looking at yourself. It's a way of looking at your people, but sometimes it really shouts it out, right? So again, if you're trained to see things exactly opposite, if you're trained to look at the world and see it as just a completely random place, as a place without any God, without any deeper meaning, it's all about me, or it's all about, you know, I and self-gratification or fulfillment or whatever you want, then to get started is difficult. So you need these, you know, the kind of sometimes you need a charismatic person, you know, with the right tool set or whatever it is. That's not what I'm here to. Again, I don't have those necessarily, that toolkit to be able to go out to any, you know, guy on campus and rope him in. But what I can say though is that once he's a part of that system, as it were, of living in the world of Emunah, then it's a system, it's a place that can become very, very rich, or it's a place that can be, you know, kind of sparse and empty. And that's really our job, to make it as rich as possible, to make it a place, you know, to live in a world of Emunah, right? To live a life of Emunah. You know, that's where the Rambam can say, yeah, that's a duty. You know, it's a duty because it's not, well, who's telling me this duty and how am I going to believe something I don't believe? Well, yeah, you know, it's something that you can really work with the Torah, work with your life experience, work with your eyes. You know, you can read a newspaper and see, you know, and read into the paper completely different. You know, two people can experience the same incident, right? Can read the same article in the newspaper. I'll tell you one story with my grandmother. My wife will enjoy this, because she also mentions it often. But my grandmother went through the war, went through the Shoah on a you know, very specific route. You know, each survivor had his own route through the Shoah, and my grandmother had, you know, her own route. She's Lithuanian, and she was in the Kovno ghetto, and from there she was taken to a work camp, a labor camp, and later on she ended up in a camp in Germany, and from there she was on a ship. You know, she had a whole long trail going through the Holocaust, and she didn't know it at the time, but there was another woman who was still alive. She's the wife of, the wife of Revolver, Zechrona Levracha, one of the leading mashgichim, and she was also from the same place, Lithuania, Kovno, and she went to the same camps and really did the same trail. They didn't know each other, and they met when my grandmother must have been 80 or so years old. And so was, you know, Rebbetzin Volba, more or less the same age, I don't know exactly. And they met for the first time. And you know, and going through this kind of experience that they both had, you know, was obviously a very emotional meeting, you know, that they discovered that they were, you know, exactly had the same stops and the same route, the same trail, and they were on the same boat at the end. And that was where their kind of that was where their paths departed from each other, because my grandmother stayed on the boat, and Rebbetzin Volba, I think she jumped off at some stage, and they were both saved, but you know, then the paths kind of broke apart. But the interesting thing was the totally different perspectives that they had. Rebbetzin Volba, she said, you know, it was a real miracle that our fingernails, we never had to cut them. We didn't have anything to trim our fingernails with. and I noticed that, you know, they were always reasonable. They didn't cause us, you know, kind of grief. I don't know why she thought specifically about that point. But at the point that she went, my grandmother said, well, you know, come on, we just didn't have any nutrition, so they didn't grow, you know, do me a favor. You know, so these are, you know, two very different perspectives on the same kind of physiological event. You know, it's a simple example, but you can read a newspaper, read about anything that's going on in the world, whether it's, you know, a hurricane in America or it's, you know, whatever's going on here, and just look at them from completely different perspectives. And is your world a world of emunah, a world with a Kadosh Baruch Hu playing a role or not? Yes.
So I have a question for you.
Sure.
It's a few questions in one.
Go.
So if a person has emunah, is that just emunah in God or also in the Torah? Because again, there's so many different opinions in the Torah and so many different leaders that we have in this generation. Some are excellent and great, and others use the principles of emunah amongst every type of Jew, from Hasidim to Litvish, to convince people to do things that I think level-headed people wouldn't do. Everything from protesting the streets, throwing rocks, bad rabbanim, quote unquote, you know, for whatever they're doing, versus people just giving all of their money to certain rabbis or whatever it may be. And even if you look in the Torah itself, you know, there's so many different opinions, and some we know scientifically aren't correct today, or, you know, they're based on things that don't exist, that we know just aren't true today. So what are the borders of emunah? Because I find that people that really work on emunah start to connect dots that aren't there. So they say this happened because of this, and it's not. And then people go down this path of emunah thinking, I'm right and you're wrong because I have such strong emunah. I know God wants me to do this, and I know God this is the truth in Torah, this specific aspect or this. And the question is emunah just the belief in God, or also the belief in Torah? And what part of it? All of it? And secondly, with that, what are the borders of emunah to stay a rational person? Because when you work on that muscle, sometimes it grows out of control for people, and they do very stupid and crazy things that are not grounded, and it's a real danger because people think that they understand God when most people, 99.9% of us, probably don't. And we connect the dots, whether it's with fingernails or anything else, meaning one aspect might be true, one might not be, or they're both true, or they're both not, but people proclaim to know what God wants. This is my mission in life from God. Well, did God tell you that? Or because you feel strongly one way and you'll feel strongly the next day about something else? What are the limits?
So, you know, well, first of all, what I'm speaking about here is just the rudiments of belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, belief in God. I'm not speaking about belief in the Torah, not speaking about Har Sinai right now, certainly not speaking about believing in rabbis, whatever that means. You know, there's a, you know, people often band around the idea of, you know, emunas chachamim, you know, believing in rabbis. You know, the Rambam understands emunas chachamim as in a completely different way. He says emunas chachamim means you have to have the emunah, meaning like the knowledge, the awareness of chachamim. You have to have the way of thinking, the mindset of chachamim, rather than belief in chachamim. You know, certainly sometimes we believe in people, meaning we trust people, but that's a different kind of idea. You know, in what I'm speaking about here is living with God. Living with God doesn't require any of the package deal that you're speaking about in that sense. And I'll be very happy, you know, in the coming, you know, couple of weeks to speak about the content of emunah beyond, you know, the basic belief in a Kadosh Baruch Hu, which is, you know, what I want to speak about today, that the meaning of this belief. And you know, next week, Hashem, we'll speak about, you know, broadening that. What is it that we should or we need to be believing in? You know, the Rambam has his 13 principles. But the Rambam was a very rational person. He would not want any of us to be believing in all kind of irrational things that take us out of the kind of ground floor of our understanding of the world. You know, there's a ground floor. There's a basic understanding of the way in which the world works. We should not abandon that, meaning we should know about what nutrition does to us. We should know about, you know, how the world functions. We should know that if we'll, you know, jump off of a 5-story building, then we'll probably get hurt. We should know those things. We should not allow our emunah to interfere with our basic, rational, scientific, if you want, understanding of the world, because that's just true. Meaning, the Ramban says in his commentary to Parashas Bo, it's a very famous statement, right? The Ramban says that we don't have a chelik, we don't have a portion in the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu until we believe shekol dvareinu mikreinu, that all of our events and happenings are nisim, like miracles, right? Ein bahem teva, there's no nature, uminhagei shel olam, and way of the world klal, right? Rather, when a person does good, he gets rewarded. If a person does bad, the Rambam would also, the Ramban, again, I'm going out on a limb, all right? But the Ramban would also agree to exactly the opposite statement. He would also agree to the statement that says that kol dvareinu, that all of our events and are all teva, they're all nature. Ein bahem nisim klal, that there's no nes at all. They're both true, right? Of course, there's nature. Of course, we know the sun rises every morning and it sets in the evening. Of course, if I'm going to not notice that there's a step here, I'm going to trip and fall over, right? That's just the way of the world. That's how the world works. At the same time, this is the emunah, is to draw in this other layer, to draw in the additional layer, the transcendent layer, the layer of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Well, it didn't have to happen to me, right? If it happened to me, then there's something else there. True, I should be more careful next time, for sure, and be more careful, right? But if it happened, then there's something else going on here. Now,
the way it's set up, though, especially post the Beis Hamikdash, is that we are completely relying on rabbis. It's rabbinic, totally.
In which sense? Why?
In the sense that there's no temple that we can see and experience miracles.
The rabbis don't have miracles either.
They don't, exactly. But I think what Arya is saying, and I'm tapping into it, is we have no choice but to rely on other people to guide us spiritually. If you're saying that the Rambam is saying, fundamental emunah, is irrespective of Rabbanim.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel that and I hear that. But the reality is the practical living as a Jew is you can't move without teachers, because speaking from personal experience and a lot of people in the room, we knew absolutely nothing.
Listen, each person has his own trail, each person has the course of his own life and the people that help him along. Of course, we're all interdependent. Where nobody is, we're not atoms. I like to say we're not atoms, we're molecules. Right? Molecules meaning we're bunches of atoms. Of course, we live together with others. Some people have a deeper knowledge of Torah, others have a deeper knowledge of medicine, others have a deeper knowledge of finance. Right? And the rabbis need the finance people, and they both need the doctors, and they both need the rabbis. But the rabbi isn't my agency. There's no agency in Judaism. It's about me and my relationship with God. Leave the rabbis out of this, right? If you've got a question, you don't know whether your chicken's kosher or not, you'll ask your rabbi, right? If you don't know how to interpret a certain passage of the Gemara or of the Torah, then you'll ask the rabbi, and the rabbi might give you a few different interpretations, and he'll say you choose between them, whatever you think is right. And I think that's what a good rabbi ought to do, by the way. And when people ask me for advice, I don't tell people what to do. I don't feel that's a rabbinic responsibility. I give people some insights. I try, put things on the table that they might not see, and then go. You make the decision. That's about personal responsibility. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to hold the rabbi accountable. He's going to hold us accountable, right? We have to make the decisions. We have to be responsible. And the very first area of responsibility is living with God, is to have emunah in our life. That's about me and God, each one of us and the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Judaism on the one hand is a religion that speaks about the nation, that speaks about, the kind of the klal. but it certainly also speaks about the individual, right? It's in this week's parasha, by the way, in Parashas Noach, right? Parashas Noach, when it speaks about that the whole world was safa achat, was one language, dvarim achadim, and one. Now that didn't work out. That's no good. Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want this ultimate kind of conformism that everyone's the same. Each person has his own relationship with God. Each person has his own way of experiencing a Kadosh Baruch Hu in his life, of bringing emunah into the world. And for sure, just leave the rabbis out of this discussion, please. This is not, give them their respect, but not here. Yeah, of course.
I mean, you kind of alluded to it before, but also, so you're saying that reaching a true level of emunah, it's not necessarily a uniquely Jewish thing, right?
For sure. Absolutely. Emunah is something that I think, the Jewish people have a special role in bringing emunah to the world. They're chosen in that sense because of this purpose. But absolutely, I mean, the Rambam says in one of his letters, the Rambam says that Christianity is kind of doing our job because it's spreading belief in God. They do it in their way, and it might be somehow flawed in certain senses. It depends on the exact branch of Christianity, but for sure, and we have a certain mission. We don't have a mission to convert people to Judaism, but we have a mission of bringing the light of God into the world, and we start by doing that with our own lives. And insofar as we live with the Kadosh Baruch Hu in the world, then that's how we'll speak, then that's how we'll function, and that's how we'll operate, and that will spread to others also. We start from ourselves, but certainly this is a kind of emunah isn't just a Jewish thing. It's not. It's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects from humanity broadly writ, and that's something which we're often very busy with ourselves, and we've got enough problems just dealing with Kihilat Or Chadash. But the world is a big place, and put your videos on YouTube and let everyone see them, for sure.
But also, the Jewish people have a really big responsibility, and generally the ones that look Jewish, have more of a responsibility, because there are many people in the street that are Jewish, and sometimes they're like, are they Jewish? Are they Jewish? They don't look like a religious Jew, but the religious Jews who don't behave, let's say, as they should, which unfortunately we see more often than not. So it's very hard not to judge Judaism on these Jews. So when, like, your younger 20-year-old cousin is like, I don't want anything to do with this because look at these people, or like if a husband doesn't give the wife the get and it's very public, or if you hear about, God forbid, some rabbi who's molesting boys in a school, and it's like constant barrage of information that's being thrown at you, or you're in a line in a supermarket and there's a person behind you who's being completely offensive and they happen to look like a religious Jewish person. So it's very hard not to
right. It's a small divergence from the discussion, but very briefly, every set of people, whether they're Jews or they're Hindus or the Muslims or they're Christians, whatever they are, every set of people, you'll have the good guys, you'll have the bad guys, everywhere. There's no exception, and Jewish people are not the exception to the rule.
Except for one thing. Before you said the study of Torah itself.
Well, that's a good question, and it's a question that we should be asking ourselves. Why do you have Torah scholars that sometimes are living a clearly godless world? Meaning, why didn't it work for them? And clearly the answer is something wrong with their study, right? They're not doing it right. And why and in which way? And of course, that's a good place for reflection, I agree. But I would just add one thing on that, and that is that one has to know sometimes people look for excuses, They say, well, look at that rabbi, how awful he is, so I'm not going anywhere near Judaism. It's often a bit of an excuse,
You forget the good guys.
there are a lot of good guys out there, and perhaps there's something else which is there as an underlying cause that she doesn't really want to get into Judaism anyway, and she's using the baddies as a kind of excuse. You know, that's also a possibility. I don't want to go on too long. Let's call it a night for now.
How does that answer your first question?
Well, what was my first question?
How can God command us to believe in Him?
Well, I think that it basically answers in the following way. It says that the starting point of the instruction from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God, to believe in God, isn't a starting point of atheists. You know, we're not coming into the equation as, you know, who is God? We don't believe in anything, you know, and therefore the instruction has no meaning, right? We're not starting from there. We're starting from a kind of a basic assumption that there is a deity, that there is a God. Why do we have that assumption? Well, like, I don't know your name, but like, I'm sorry? Leanne. Well, like Leanne said, you know, even before she was religious, she believed in God, you know. The vast majority, I don't know exactly how it works, but most people, you corner them, they'll say, well, there's something, you know. It's a starting point that many people have.
But it's not the same God.
Well, you know what I mean? It's a God if you're Jewish, so it's the Jewish God, you know.
It's not the same. Dayan Yehoshua says, you know, at the end of your prayers, it says that people they're praying to.
Well, the pagans, you mean? Well, you know.
The pagans, just other people not praying to the same God that you're talking about.
Well,
I think there's at least a starting point with.
Right, but the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims have the same God. I mean, a lot of people have this God, and certainly if you're Jewish, again, don't forget, the Torah is speaking to the Jewish people, right? The Jewish people, if they'll have a conception of a God, then it's probably going to be the Jewish conception of God. Now, it's not a very developed conception. It's not a very, you know, they haven't deepened their awareness. They haven't worked on their emunah. But that's kind of a start, like it's a basic starting point.
Them work on that muscle.
It's telling them, yeah, believe in the deep sense. Live in a world of emunah, right? For sure. You know, integrate this into your life. Make this central. Make this a real part of your day-to-day life.
Embrace it.
Yeah, embrace it, absolutely. And that embracing is really, you know, something that, you know, we can't take this for granted. It doesn't happen automatically. You know, if you just let your life slide on autopilot, it doesn't happen automatically. It's something which really requires an investment of thought, of energy, of meeting, right? Meeting up with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. I used this expression a bit when we spoke about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that these are days that are really convened for, you know, spending time with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. But we have it every day in whether it's studying Torah, whether it's events in our lives that give us pause for reflection, or whether it's davening. You know, davening is also an invitation to meet God. We don't do it every davening. I don't, right? Sometimes we just get through it. I know, okay, it's true. But sometimes we have an occasion to really daven, you know, to really, you know, to meet the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and these are all opportunities to kind of, yeah, to whether it's a duty or whether it's a precondition, you know, it doesn't, you know, that's not the main discussion now, but yeah, so that's more or less where I wanted to get to today.
One of my rabbins links the word uman as a craftsman,
right,
to the word emunah and amen,
right,
because that's what you're doing.
Crafting your world.
You're crafting your world.
Yeah.
And it's all linked.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Like it.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Thanks a lot.
Can I just ask you a question?
Sure.
It might be very basic, but I guess this all starts from when we're very little. Like, my daughter just turned 7, and recently she's really asking me, like, what is Hashem? Is Hashem a boy? Is Hashem a girl? Does he have eyelashes? And I'm like really stuck to know. I don't know what Hashem looks like. Like, I have my beliefs, but so I was just wondering how you would answer that.
Well,
because she's starting to ask these questions, and I think that's where the emunah starts.
right.
Obviously, it's in the home, but just by asking the questions, it's opening doors to her.
Well, first of all, it's fantastic. It's good that she's asking because, you know, questions are the way that we grow and the way that, you know, I pity people who don't have questions. You know, there are some people that they've got all the answers. You just ask a question, it's like pressing a button, and they've got all the. I've got many questions that I'm, you know, not sure how to answer, and I'm dealing with some of them for years. And sometimes I think I've got an answer, and then I think, well, it's not such a great answer after all, and then I go back to them. And that's good. That makes us grow, you know. The questions are, you know, the word Adam, Aleph Dalet Mem, is the same gematria as Ma, as a question. You know, we're just questions, really, and that helps us to grow. Adam is also the letters of the word Ma'od, is more. And questions allow us to be more than we are. If we don't have questions, if we just have answers, then we are what we are. But we've got questions, when we can become more than what we are. Then, so it's great that children have questions. And it's also okay if you say, you know, parents don't need to have all the answers to the questions. You know, you can say, well, you know, we don't need to think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, about God as a boy or as a girl. We can think about him as something that's, you know, beyond the categories of boys and girls, and it's something that we need to think about more. You know, and you're 7 years old. You know, it's confusing. It's confusing, but it's growing up with God as something, as being a part of our lives. And of course, we develop our conception and our understanding of God as we grow. And you know, you don't have to tell her, well, he's this and this. You can say, well, you know, he's not. I
told her that Hashem is in everything.
Yeah.
It's not a specific.
Okay. You know, and speaking about Hashem being in everything is also, you know, it's a kind of statement that we grow up with, and then we develop that as we become older, and you know, we think, well, is he here? You know, is he here? And you know, well, yeah, you know, this is. Well, again, so then later on we studied the Balatanya, who speaks like this, and Nefesh Chaim, who would probably object to speaking like this, and yeah, you know, and these are different conceptions of Emunah, and it's good, you know, it's all in flux, it's all developing. And
it reminds me of what you just said. It reminds me of a situation. I was once sitting with an old atheist in London.
Yeah.
And we were sitting. It was actually on Shabbat, and it was sitting around the Shabbos there, and he was sitting next to his wife of 40 plus years, and he said to me, being the religious one in the room, obviously, he said, I don't have any questions because I know there's no soul. So I said, okay. I said, so what do you think about like love? And this guy happens to be a doctor.
Yeah.
So he gave me a whole explanation about what happens with the electronic pulse.
Physiological.
So I let him speak. I had it all lined up after he was going to finish. And I said, so tell me. So your wife is sitting next to you. How do you think she feels about the fact that you love her because electrons are smashing into each other in your head? Anyway, so that ended the conversation. But it's true, he had no questions because he said, I've got all the answers.
Wait, he's religious but doesn't believe
No, he's not religious.
Not religious.
He's proudly unreligious. Proudly unreligious.
But yeah, you know, it's a good point. People don't wake up. You don't get up in the morning for physiological reactions or electrons moving around in your mind. You wake up for love, you know, and that love obviously is something which goes beyond those kind of you know, Emunah is a bit like that also. You know, you wake up for that relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, for seeing Him in the world, and not for the philosophy, as it were, that we mentioned before, or for proofs. You don't wake up for proofs. You wake up for that experience. Anyway,
very good.
Good.
Very good. To be continued.
To be continued. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.